My story starts out in North Arvindale, where I met my dearest friend in life and my first teacher. I realized that in chasing people to latch my star to, it diminished my own. If I were going to change things in the world, I was going to have to start being the change I wanted to see, not finding it in other people. So I put down my news hat and put on my doing shit hat. I scoured through news vids and cross-referenced data, doing my own private detecting. I won't tell you who I was, because not only does it not matter anymore, it puts me into serious danger. You can't just drop truth bombs and think nothing's gonna happen to you in the fallout. I found 3 crimes that were interesting to me, and I decided to do a little looking into it. I'm not saying that the NNVPD are mostly incompetent, but I'm not saying that either. I mean, if we all keep shitting on our lawn and nobody cleans it up, well, we just live in that shit, right? I'm no longer living in that shit anymore, not if I can help it. So, there were 3 murders that happened all in very similar ways, and I was very curious exactly why. All 3 of them were street people, pseudo-homeless. Now, if you're the type that says, fuck the homeless, their lives don't matter, fuck you. Stop listening to my blog right now. Everyone matters. Don't let that corpo bullshit con you into not caring. You're not living in search of the American dream, you're just a slave jacked into the corpo collective think tank. So, a street preacher preaching out against the Steelyard, name was Doc, was out in front of Steelyard headquarters for, I'd say 10 years or so, mysteriously kills himself in the middle of a sermon. That's not necessarily weird in and of itself, but it's the why and how that makes it interesting. One minute, he's preaching about how the Steelyard took his life and his family, and mid-sentence, he just runs into traffic. A passing car flatlined him. Eyewitnesses say he was screaming in fear. Something got in his head. That wasn't a suicide, it was a murder. The next was Winnie Claxton. She was a nature buff, the type to grow her own food on the roof of her apartment. But really, she was just so poor she had to eat things that grew out of the dirt and do all the little shit we take for granted. She was out on the patio, sitting on a lawn chair, talking to her old friend about how she lost her job to the Steelyard, and what do you know, out of the blue she dives off the 15th level of her apartment complex and shish kebabs herself on a wrought iron gate. No warning, just boom, one bad word, dead. By this point, I think you all are starting to see the pattern. Say something fucked up about Steelyard and you off yourself. The last one that was recorded, was Elias, no last name on file. She was a tweaker whose entire family died in a mine collapse when she was 10. She had been on her own the entire time, and can we guess by now what company fucked her over and gave her no support for losing her entire family, mother, father, and 2 brothers? You got it, Steelyard. Now, according to her records, she was not a saint by any stretch, but she wasn't a complete chum either. Her and her band of druggies, who by all accounts were low-level stick-up men, were talking at their hangout. She went on about how she wanted to fuck up the Steelyard with a fiery passion. Then, even before she finished her sentence, she put a gun in her own mouth and pulled the trigger. But, get this, she lived. Yeah, she probably won't be winning beauty contests anymore, but she pulled through. This is where I think my tale truly starts, when I put my boots to the ground. I got a gun. Before you think this is going to turn into me going akimbo, flatlining corpo thugs, I got a gun. I didn't say I could use it. If I was going to brush up against some of these dangerous individuals, I thought it best to have it and not need it. I went to Wings of Mercy and tried to find Miss Elias. I had to move fast. I was certain that she didn't have a medical plan, so even with a bullet wound to the brain, that would only buy her a day or 2 in the hospital. Remind me to talk about how fucked up hospitals are too, but I'm losing the plot here. I had to pretend I was Elias's family to get in the same room with her. And they let me in. It wasn't even because it was the right thing for them to do. They were just hoping to push the bill onto me somehow. Her chumhead buddies were hanging out, holding a vigil for her. And if I can't say anything nice about them, they at least had that going on for them. Though, who knows, maybe they were just looking for an angle to get into the medical supplies and get higher than they'd ever been. I was going to speak to them first, but before I could, 4 corporal thugs from the steel yard came down the hallway, outfitted up in heavy gear and rifles. They must have been specialists because they were dressed in all black armor, so heavy all you could see was the whirring red sprites of light moving from left to right in the visors of their helmets. I noticed the steel yard's tungsten steel emblem on their shoulder. They didn't idle, they didn't pause or hesitate, they beelined, which told me whatever they were there to do didn't include tact or nuance. Elias's druggy friends stepped up. The first one had a synthetic left arm that stopped at the elbow, but looking at the track marks on his right, he must have lost it shooting up into it. He put a hand on one of the goons, and I regretted it for him. The corporal merc headbutted the little tweaker so hard the few teeth he had left clicked on the tile. Some girl, who I later found out was new to their crew, made the mistake of pulling on them, and they sprayed her with bullets and painted the wall with her blood without saying 2 words. The other 2 druggies put their hands up in surrender and hugged the wall like it was their dance partner at the prom. The mercs didn't fuck around, they ignored them and pulled Elias out of her shabby pod, 2 pushing the stretcher, 2 keeping watch. I had never trailed anyone in my life, so chances were they more than likely saw me, but even if they did, they probably couldn't have given a fuck. I followed them up to the roof, where they had a flying transport to extract them. I myself don't have cash enough for something like that, so I called in a monitor. They cost 3 times more than a wheel cab, but if I ever need to be a place quick, I'll spring for one. For those that aren't in the know, the steel yard owns all the monitors, not some of them. And for those that don't have my paranoid nature, most suspect they're watching everything we do, and I believe it. By sheer luck, they didn't fly too much faster than the monitor could go, because monitors, if you didn't know, cannot punch it or hurry. The AI drivers in the vehicle disallow any attempts to break the law. I got the impression that the corporal mercs were going to the steel yard's headquarters, so that's where I told my monitor to go, because they need a destination, or they sit there until you give them one. I soon found that their transport veered off into the slums of Adams Estate. You know the place that anyone who isn't in a crew or a criminal would ever go. I have no clue why they'd be going there. Well, unless whatever they were doing was off the books. The benefit of doing business in a lawless zone was you didn't have to worry about the law. Because I couldn't pinpoint where they were going exactly, I couldn't tell the monitor exactly where to land. I, in fact, had to continuously change my course just to keep the mercs in eyeshot. When they disappeared entirely, and I saw them set down at an abandoned high school called Parthenon High, I had a serious debate if I should set down there at all. As far as I was concerned, in Adams Estate, I was candy for criminals, meat for murderers, and it wasn't a matter of if I would get messed up out there, it was a matter of when and how hard. I fought my inner bitch and I did it. I was just 2 blocks and I could make it 2 blocks. If I'm to bring you these stories, I can't be afraid to put it all on the line if I absolutely have to. Though I must admit, I nearly shit myself when I saw the lights of any passing car. When I made it the 2 blocks, I saw that the mercs must have went inside. The abandoned Parthenon High was in disrepair. It probably had been one of the first institutions to fold when Mayor York cut our losses 40 years ago and just ceded Adams Estate to criminals to cut down on the loss of life of the police. This little piece of hell was probably a steel yard black site, a place where corpos could do their dirt in peace. It wasn't like one gang alone was strong enough to do actual harm to a corporation, even one that wasn't quite as global as Steel Yard. I slipped through a hole in the gate that led to a field with bleachers that hadn't seen use in decades, rusted monuments of better days. The grass was tall and wild, higher than my entire body in some patches, which gave me an easy point of approach. The fear I felt, even getting this far, was stifling, and I'm not embarrassed to say it, but if I was to ever get the stories I needed, I had to learn the skills, and the only way to learn the skills I needed was to fuck up and do it. I scanned the perimeter of the school. I noticed that there were small cameras positioned strategically outside. I had a mod put in the back of my eye that could pick up the heat sigs of other tech. Something that I found useful in my other life. I was pretty sure I wasn't going to get through the main doors easily. I could see that they set up sensors at the thick doors of all the common entryways. But the high school was too big to cover every door and every window, or at least that was my thinking. I pulled out my descrambler and found all the networks in the area, and because this was a shit part of town with major predators, there weren't any but the ones that I needed. I wouldn't call myself on the level of a net runner, but when it came to simple computer maneuvers, I wasn't without a few tricks here and there. I found a window that didn't have metal shutters because about 50% of them did. I found the invisible laser link that traced across the window and severed its connection to the alarm. My heart was beating out of my chest. Up until this point, I could return, but not now. If I was caught, it was kill on sight. It may have seemed like a simple window, but for me, that window represented a turning point in my life. I wasn't just some corpo conformist, but a cyberpunk. I was now on the other side of the law, officially fighting the system. The place I found myself was a Steelyard Corporal black site. I was in an old science lab with 60-year-old tech caked in a sheen of dust. I put on my outfit, securing my camera around my neck and looping the straps under each arm. If you want to see the footage, look for the link below. I peeked into the hallway, and it was an odd blend of old outdated tech mixed with high-end sensibilities, as if they expanded further into the school when they needed to. Otherwise, they didn't bother. I could hear the distant wails echoing down the hall. Since I didn't know exactly where Elias was, I was going to have to check these rooms a little at a time. I figured she'd be in some sort of place dedicated to medicine. Otherwise, they would have capped her in her bed when they first saw her and wouldn't have bothered taking her at all. I followed the wailing, and from the layout, I'd bet that was the gymnasium. The door opened with a keycard, but I managed to trick the computer into thinking I had it well enough to open. I peeked in before I approached and saw the Steelyard Corpos entering the Torture Olympics. There were men in lab coats, mercs, maniacs, waterboarding, racking, brainjacking, and quite a few forms of torture that I had to get on the net and figure out later. All these things happened independent from each other, like a fucked up science fair of the macabre. I figured that if I got spotted, I wouldn't be flatlined outright. They'd probably ask me for some sort of credentials because there were way too many people here doing dirt for all of them to have known each other and to have known each other's dirt. If someone saw me in the building tiptoeing around, I'd look like someone that wasn't supposed to be here. I took in a deep breath and prepared for the acting gig of my life. I covered my camera with my coat. The potential of me getting spotted filming was disastrous. I doubt any one of these psychos would mind killing me for that offense. The wooden floors were no longer polished and pristine. There were little places where it was rotted, and there was no shine in it from years of neglect. As I walked, it was as I expected. No one bothered to ask me questions or even make eye contact. Each group were in their own worlds, tormenting whoever it was unfortunate enough to be in their clutches, while I and everyone assumed that things like this existed. It's an entirely different situation when you see it for yourself firsthand. The world that these people lived in was not the world I did. I don't know exactly how, but I kept it together. I moved towards the back where I presume the locker rooms would have been. Back there, I saw medical equipment set up, and patients or hostages were strapped to medical beds as if it were built for triage. There was not enough equipment for it to be considered a doctor's office, but just enough for you to know that there was some measure of healing happening here. I noticed past the rows of comatose Elias in the back, in a place that at one time might have been the women's shower. All throughout her head were the familiar wires that were connected to a computer. There was a man wearing thick glasses whose eyes reflected the glyphs of tech dancing off of it. Two of the corporal mercs were watching Elias like a hawk, so much so that they saw me. I got the distinct impression one of them made me from the hospital, or at least suspected something. I had my gun at my side, so that was always an option. A stupid option, but an option. The sentries pulled away from Elias and ran at me. I froze in place. What was I going to do? Run through the entire school hoping to make it? Hoping they were the only people with guns? I was going to have to play dumb. I didn't have a name that carried weight, so maybe they would consider me nobody worth their time. As I prepared for the acting gig of my life, my eyes pre-watered with tears. The four mercs walked past me, their glowing red visors giving them the look of cyborgs. All of a sudden, it was just me and the guy on the computer, who was miles away. I could have had a gun right next to him and he never had noticed. I looked at my gun, hard, contemplating if I could, or should I just pop up behind him and spill his brains on the floor. I had never killed anyone, and I wasn't looking to start, but I had to wonder, was that the fate of all outlaws, to be callous to killers? Maybe it was, but it wasn't going to be me. Not yet, at least. I slowly began unplugging the cables that flowed out of Elias into the machine, hoping to get as many free as I could before this dorky netrunner noticed. If push came to shove, I still had the gun, and just pointing it was enough to get most people to think twice. I managed to release the plugs in her body, but after I disconnected the cords in the back of her head, the netrunner took his glasses off and stared at me. He said, "What's going on here?" I brushed up against my pistol, but I didn't pull it. It was as foreign to me as a third arm. "We're moving her," I said with as much confidence as I could muster. "Am I coming with or what?" the little man said with his huge visor resting on his forehead. "No, we'll call you when it's time," I said casually, like I was just another cog in the corporate machine, with no passion or true concern for what I was doing, but was doing because I had to be. The netrunner flipped down his visor and blew out a huge pink bubblegum bubble. "You're a dime," he said sightlessly. I inwardly felt like I had a mini heart attack, but I outwardly walked to the back of the mobile hospital bed and started pushing it through the gymnasium. Every eye that fell on me was an accusation. I pushed slowly past it, as if I wasn't going to ask about their shit, so they best not ask about mine. I heard faint gunfire coming from outside, and down the hallway I saw two corporal mercs charging towards me. I didn't flinch, I just kept pushing, and they pushed past me to the commotion. I figured that I'd have to go out the way I came in, or else I was going to have to deal with a checkpoint or a sentry of some sort. I knew that there was no way I was going to be able to justify pushing a hospital pod through a field in a corporal black site. I was going to have to carry Elias and sneak through the field. I didn't know if I could, honestly. She wasn't that big. In fact, she was malnutritioned and small, but I'm not that big myself. I'm not rocking any mods that would boost me either. I figured, fuck it. If I was doing it, I was either doing it now or never. The gunfire that was in the distance was now very much at the forefront, but I had no idea what was going on until I stepped foot outside. I could hear the bullets screaming past me, ripping swaths in the air. I felt as if I were moving in slow motion. I could see a man making huge, unfathomable, jet-assisted leaps across the building. He made every piece of this place his battlefield. The corporal mercs had their hands full. He treated them like a varsity player pitted against freshmen. His shoulder-mounted machine gun popped off and the shells fell like rain. Corporal mercs had quite the time keeping him in their sights, even though he was as big as two people fused together. He was chromed up so hard, if he wasn't a cyber psycho, he was a mod away. I broke for the tall grass, hoping to stay as far off any of their radars as I possibly could. Jackbooted mercs were sweeping the field, not for me, but just to gain ground on this man who was laying waste to their ranks. The way that man gleefully laughed when he fired his oversized AR rifle scared me just as hard as any of the Corpo thugs. Though there was something to admire about a man that had found such contentment, even if it was for something as depraved as gruesome death. 2 corporal mercs happened to run past my location, and I froze in place like a deer that thought if it stayed still enough, maybe it could just fade away. My shoulders were burning carrying Elias, and with all the nervous and labored shifting, complete silence was an impossibility. The red swirling visor lights fell on me, and though I couldn't see their eyes, I could feel their slow realization of what was happening and the wheels of action clicking in their heads as they began to point their weapons at me. I cowered, not having anything else I could think to do other than hope. As their thoughts turned to action, holes exploded in their backs. Machine gun blasts dotted their bodies with red, and they fell over screaming, blindly firing into the empty gray sky. The cyber psycho emerged from a high crops of weeds. His head slightly peeked over the top, putting him well over 7 feet. He saw me helpless, holding an unconscious Elias. I barely came to his knee from this angle. In a blink that felt like minutes, he assessed us. "Thanks for the assist." His deep voice had a robotic reverb, as if his throat was replaced with cyber. He looked Native American or some sort of lost tribe. He had a mohawk of brilliant blue flames sparking out of his head, and the only thing on him that wasn't chromed up was his face, starting from his top lip to the top of his head. There wasn't a place on his body that didn't have a weapon or implement of death. I'd later asked him what he was, and he laughed and said he was a farmer reaping in a death harvest. In the split second he flatlined those corpos, he turned his attention back to the battle and the mercs he was engaged with. He managed a content smile as he jumped into the air and the jets engaged under his boots to propel him out of sight. I didn't waste the opportunity, and I picked up Elias and tried my best to keep running. I moved erratically through the weeds, the weight I was carrying and all the uncertainty of barely knowing where I was going to make my trip fairly difficult. I exited the brush of the field and saw the gate, but that's where it all went wrong for me, because I had no cover. Everything I could see me back. I made a break for the gate, though I was running so slow you may well have called it walking. The guns blazed over my back, and I could hear that gleeful psycho changing the forecast, raining death. A bullet hit me, and I fell out. I could barely see. The sudden shock of the pain put me on my ass, and I was crawling on gravel. I saw a pair of black armored corporals rushing in on my location. I didn't have anything to lose now. I went for my heat. I sucked so badly at it, I bobbled the draw, and the mercs responded in kind, except they didn't fuck up. As I was about to get a first-hand account of what heaven was like, the humongous chromed-up gorilla's retrojet popped off, and he landed directly in front of me. I couldn't see it, but I heard bullets bounce off of metal, as if he blocked it with his body. "Now we even, he said to me with a smile. I wasn't exactly sure when I had gotten the upper hand, but I was crying too hard to naysay. He charged at the mercs who had shot at me, and 2 blades glowing orange from molten heat emerged from his wrist. The 2 mercs fired backwards. I guess they did the math in their heads, and they weren't going to be able to down him before he made one piece of them into 2. He ran one through and lifted him with godlike strength. The other retreated into the high weeds of the field. The Steelyard corporals weren't content on just bending over and taking it. Emerging from the gymnasium doors were several chromed-up individuals of their own, along with a slew of better-armed corporal soldiers. The man smiled. I could see it from the ground, but he half looked at me as if he were waging a war inside of himself. "You good, he said to me. "No," I said reflexively. I was in too much pain to play it coy. He grit his teeth and looked to the oncoming army, then back to me, who was well on my way to bleeding out, and he chose me over them. He hoisted me and Elias over his shoulder with no effort and hopped into the sky. The sensation felt like a rocket taking off. Much of this I went in and out of consciousness for, but I recalled him driving me somewhere in a heavily armored truck. He told me several times, "You need to stay awake, huh?" And I did for the most part, but my eyes were seeing still shots of reality, missing details and context. When my mind tuned back into our regularly scheduled program, I was sitting in a leather doctor's chair. My surroundings were dark and dank. It felt underground like a basement. I saw Elias sitting in a similar chair to the right, but still out like a light. His place looked like a Ripper Doc's lab. It had all the amenities of an illegal back alley chop shop. Old, outdated tools, metallic limbs hanging from the ceiling like a butcher shop, posters of bands, and TVs thrown all about the walls. Some of them pointed at what was probably outside, while others were on random visuals ranging from nature shows to pornography. The chromed up gorilla was sitting in a chair that was much too small for him, next to a lanky man with one metal arm which connected to his back, revealing a metal spine that clung to him like a centipede. The blue flames that made the chromed up gorilla's mohawk were just a dull blue, like a burner on simmer, over the full blast I saw when he was in a rage. The two men had their backs turned to me and played an old analog fighting game with antiquated tech that had died on the vine 50 years ago. The only time anyone played anything like that is if they went to a virtual arcade. I had fleeting visions of my childhood in old New Verta in the arcade called Elysium that was modeled from arcades from 2023. It was funny seeing the two concentrating so intensely on something so low stakes, but maybe it's just a guy thing I'd never understand. The big man lost and all but slammed down his controller. "This fucking game is rigged, huh?" "I could beat you with one hand. Will that help you?" "Fuck you, said the big man. The newcomer with the mechanized spine stood up and looked back at me. I could see the heavy metallic runners on his right side. "Get ready for a new challenger," he said, which prompted the big man to turn around. "You're awake, I guess I can't be a loser all the time, every time," he said. The little man handed the big man a few eddies. "You took a bad one, little sister. Why were you out on the board if you're not a player?" he said, standing from his chair. Sort of my first time doing any of this, so I think I did okay, considering, I said. "Not really, girlie, unless dying was part of the plan," he spoke back without actual judgment. "What was worth risking your life for in Adam's estate?" said the smaller man who approached me. The thick plates on the side of his head spun open and two small magnification glasses dropped over his right eye. He inspected my gunshot wound, which was plugged with Metagoo. "That girl there, the Steelyard wants to kill her," I said. They want to kill a lot of people. Why she trigger you?" said the big man who was bathed in magenta neon from the small window on the ceiling. I gave him the rundown of why it mattered, and he wasn't exactly surprised, but the Ripper Doc showed a bit more interest. I won't say his name because he's still alive, and not everyone signed off on letting me put their real name in my story, but for the sake of the story, I'm going to refer to him as Dietrich. That is curious, though she was rather fucked before she shot herself in the head, and she may be a piece of broccoli for the rest of her life anyway. I probably couldn't use the organs because of all the shit she was on, but I could use her eyes potentially. Would you be okay with selling them to me? He asked me. A, she's not mine, and B, she's not dead. Yet. Effectively she is, said Dietrich. The big man cut in. Look, you can at least humor the little dime store superhero, said the big man. I know he meant it as an insult, but for someone that had never been considered brave, or someone to stand on their convictions, it It was sorta cool to hear someone call you out on having integrity as a detriment.
Okay, you want to put odds on this one?
Said Dietrich to the big man.
No, she's too fucked. Just jack into her ticker and see if anything talks, eh?
For you, sure. And I'm taking her eyes if she dies.
He said to me as if I'd have to fight him on it if and when the time came. We crowded around Elias and Dietrich hooked cords to the back of her head like it was a game console. Whatever was on her mind popped up as binary noise on the main TV, but lucky for us, Dietrich was figuring the chaos.
What you see in this, Chump?
Said the big man.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to have to ask you to get the fuck out of my house and take this tweaker with you.
He said. What did you see? Please, I don't know anyone. I have to know, I said pleadingly. Dietrich took pity on me because I was looking quite pitiful.
She's got an AI in her head, fucking with her wiring,
said Dietrich, pointing at glyphs on the screen as if that meant something to me. What is it doing? I asked.
Not exactly sure, and seeing that it's proprietary to the steel yard,
I don't need this little fucker figuring out where it is and narking on me, said Dietrich.
So, with all due respect, hero, get the fuck out.
I stumbled when I stood. I could see the big man take a step as if to catch me. There was a gentle heart in him, and I could see it, though he looked like a chromed up psycho. I grit my teeth and attempted to pick up Elias. With the gunshot wound, I had to stop every 2 steps. I didn't have a health plan that was worth a damn, so the little metagoo that Dietrich stuck in me was probably all a hospital would do for me anyways. I saw the big man's eyes softening when he saw me struggling, like he did when he saved my life back in Adam's estate. He took Elias from me and hoisted her over his shoulder.
Come on, hero. I'll get you somewhere. I can't say safe, but at least not here.
We walked out into the city in the dead of night. I followed him through the streets like a child riding her parents' coattails. But that sort of tracks because as far as I was concerned, this was the day I was truly born. I stood that day. I'm still learning to walk, but trust me when I say I will learn to run, and when I do... The big man called himself Out of Time, and he chuckled to himself when he told me as if it were an inside joke that only he understood. We didn't work on real names anyways. That wasn't the arc of our relationship. Seeing this was my first day alive, I needed a name. I called myself Ravvy. It was my inside joke between me and some of my closest friends. So that's my name now. Anything that I do that is worth a damn is Ravvy. I died as far as I was concerned, and Ravvy took her place. That being said, if Dietrich was correct in his estimation that there was an AI rattling in Elias's head, attacking her through her tech that corporals could track, I couldn't take her to my house, and I for damn sure didn't have a hideout. Me and Out of Time rode through the Neo New Verta streets in his modded truck hybrid tank vehicle that I wasn't sure was street legal. But hey, he was so big, it wasn't like a fucking beat cop was gonna pull his ass over for it. We drove on the 1001 for a while until the expressway turned into the Sun Spiral and went through the Paxil building.
So, hero, what's your plan? Most like you probably need to drop her in a hospital and drive off. You ain't got the muscle to bust no skulls when they come for you, huh?
Said Out of Time. He was making quite a bit of sense. Not only did I not have the type of underground connections I needed to shield myself, I couldn't protect her if I did. I didn't want to give up now. I couldn't. I had come too far, and I hadn't gotten anywhere near what I considered the truth of the matter. Time looked to me, more machine than man, but all heart, with a bit of sympathy. I must have been looking extra pathetic, like a superhero whose power came from inciting pity.
Look, girl, I know a guy in Baskerville. I can't promise nothing, but he's into the truth and justice like you, I guess, and he owes me one.
Said Time. I smiled, and my weeping look dissipated. Why? Why do you want to help me? I asked nervously, even though I probably shouldn't have, seeing he was doing me the solid. He turned around and got off the expressway while thinking of how to word what he was going to say next. I later understood why he had to go through the motions.
Because sometimes it feels good to do good,
he said, as if almost on the verge of tears. Why did you want to burn down a Corporal Black site? I asked as he drove into the mechanized lift that would lower and give us passage to the underground.
You just worry about your mystery, huh? Your story is your story, my story is my story, huh?
He said defensively.
When I drop you, I'm in the wind. I still have shit I need to do, huh? That I didn't get to finish.
The lights fled, and the artificial neon glow of the underground took command. We grabbed the under 10 to Arvindale to Baskerville, and it was in rare form this night. I tended not to come down to the underground. I used to say, and I used to think it was because it was slumming it, that this was where the dregs lived. But now I realize it was always fear of seeing the world at its ugliest, while the underground is a city under the city with its own rules and customs. You can find horrors down there, but you can also find wonders too. Seeing it was my birthday and all, I was looking at the world with new eyes, informed by my new purpose in life. When a child ate their Brussels sprouts for the first time, it was awful, but as an adult, you were no longer that person you were before, and the underground was that for me. I formed new opinions about this place of sin that didn't sleep. Out of time parked the truck, which he called Homestead, on the street, then took Elias onto his shoulder. The streets in Baskerville were alive with activity. The bright neon lit the streets, and there was a black emptiness that formed over our heads that served as sky. Because it was nighttime, there were small randomized ceiling lights that blinked that served as simulated starlight. I didn't know where time was taking me, but when I walked behind him, I understood what it was like to feel powerful, even in his shadow. Just knowing he was in my corner gave me a taste of the allure of knowing you couldn't be fucked with. Time moved through the bustling marketplace. His feet clanged on concrete with each step. We approached Forever 21. There really is no need to explain it, and I don't know how you would know about it if you've lived in Neo New Verta. But I'll go over it for those that don't live here. Forever 21 is the biggest place for media in all of Neo New Verta. It has the hottest shows, it's a club, it's a broadcasting studio, it's an all-in-one, and the heartbeat of the city. It's owned by Static. I'll get to him later. He'll come up in a moment. So me and Time turned into Forever 21 and cut through the crowd. The marquee bore down on us like a miniature sun. Time was aware of the line to get in, he just ignored it, and nobody had the balls to say boo about it. Except for the chromed up doorman who was literally infused to the door. His tech was linked up to the wall, cords snaked through him to the building like veins.
No entry.
The door said with a face and a partial chest of flesh that popped out of the wall wearing half a bellhop uniform.
It's me, Static knows me,
said Time. The doorman looked to his right, and his seemingly human eyes glassed white as if it were sinking to tech. After a moment's deliberation, he said,
"Back door."
Time agreed. It was rather jarring to go to a club to party, then see a 7-foot chromed up gorilla holding a comatose tweaker over his shoulder. When we got around to the back, we went through several gates that opened at our approach. The building was much bigger than I thought it should be. There were TV monitors thrown all about in random locations. When we got to the back door, through the random attendants who seemed to work there, the theater commenced. In a white suit with mirrored shoes, gloves, tie that had a dull grayish blue Static motif was the host himself. Static emerged with the bombast of a parade conductor, jeweled scepter in hand. Performers that danced, or just seemed to be in his orbit just to be interesting, walked besides and behind him.
He knew Out of Time's real name, which I won't repeat, and I asked him if it was okay for me to add him in my blog later, and he said, and I quote, "I'm too big to fail. Any press I get is good press." Everyone in Neo New Verta knows Static, but for those that don't, his head is a television set. Don't ask me where his brains are. I don't know. Nobody knows if it's a helmet or tech, if he's a cyborg, a machine, or a man in a costume. "For why have you brought these wayward souls to my parlor time?" said Static.
You like the truth and fucking with Corporal's bottom lines. I figured you and Ravvy would have a lot to talk about,
"Is that true?" Static asked me. I was nervous immediately. He is, for lack of better words, the de facto president of the underground. He's a bastion for all media, so I wasn't quite ready to speak to someone on his level. I do have information that you may want to know that maybe could be interesting to you. Static's television screen's face mirrored my face, and I saw a perfect fish-eyed recording of what I just said to him. "Are you sure, dear? Because you don't sound sure." Time cut in.
She's just nervous is all. It's her first rodeo.
Static was all but ignoring his attendants who constantly buzzed in his ear, trying to pull and divide his attention towards whatever it was they considered relevant. I could tell that his attention, his time, was very precious to him, and the fact that I got even a fraction of it was an accomplishment. If I had learned anything about showmanship in my years of writing, I was going to have to pull it out now. "Is this true? Are you a virgin outlaw?" said Static, whose TV screen face turned into a question mark. "I must admit I am, but what I have is something you'd at least be interested to know. How about an AI that goes into people's heads and makes them kill themselves? Anyone who says a bad word about the steel yard, flatlined." "Oh really? Why? Details," said Static as he threw his scepter to some rando. It clocked them and bobbled off their head. That's the mystery. I don't know why, but in this woman who shot herself and lived, more or less, there is the truth. A Ripper Doc found an AI in there, I said. "So this one has a little critter playing ping pong with her brain meat. How delicious," said Static. "This is something I can sink my teeth into." Static's screen switched to an image of an old rendition of a vampire biting a helpless damsel's neck. "Come with me, child," said Static, who swung his arm around my shoulders as if symbolically pulling me into his orbit. Time stood there still, as if he wasn't going to go in. "You too, Bigum. You're her protector, are you not?" said Static.
I was just trying to help a new fish upstream, I wasn't looking to mama bird her,"
he said. "Come on," Static said again, using his real name, invoking their shared history to get him to change his mind. He relented and fell into step behind us. Forever 21 was everything. It was a chaotic mess of activity. It felt a lot like this was a place where magic happened. There was a stage area which was arena styled. On the viewing levels on top were two different clubs with two different vibes, and higher up still was the recording studio that only the most elite, or people in Static's inner circle, ever got to go in. I was lucky enough to be one of them that day, but he asked me to keep the details out of my report on the off chance it could be useful to one of his enemies. There was a soccer game going on in a theater tonight, and we passed through Club Regret over pain. Regret was a mess of swirling lights that fluctuated like the moods of the unwell. When we got to his inner sanctum and looked down, it felt a lot like how I pictured God to see the world, but I think I held it together well enough not to fangirl too much. He had a slew of random people there, which I will not mention by name, but suffice it to say, he had several netrunners up there. I couldn't tell if they were just guests that were invited or were actually in his employ. That's sort of the thing about Static. If you were with him, people could never figure how deep at a glance because of his propensity to hang out with absolutely anyone. As a media superstar, this ability makes him magic. He can dip in and out of worlds as if he lived in any of them. Time put Elias with his netrunners who hooked into her cortex. They searched wildly and intensely through her head fog, even though I could only see their lips because of the headsets over their eyes. Static sat down on the couch and lounged, which sort of looked like a throne because it was slightly elevated on a platform, so even when he was sitting, he was more or less at your eye level.
Please sit. We're probably gonna be here for a while. At least until the big brains figure something out,
said Static. You're not afraid that this AI will tell on you and lead Corporal Mercs here?
Darling, do you think that I'm worried about random attacks from mercs? Do you know the sort of shit I've said and found out about them? If they came for me, any of them came for me, they'd have to decide if I'm worth the headache before they made a move. No, corporate armies come to me, not for me. They do it with a messenger first and usually a dollar amount. Now, if what they find is worth more than the dollar amount they present to me, and it's something I'd be willing to go to war for, then, darling, we have a problem.
Static's monitor went red with images of war and death. We spoke a bit about my situation for a little, but I'm not going to get into that. He was attentive in a way I hadn't expected. For some reason, I thought he'd seem vapid and uninterested, but he seriously gave me time and seemed to honestly listen. But then again, maybe that was why he was so good at cutting to the truth, because in the end, you wanted to tell him your secrets. And because his face was a monitor, all you saw was a reflection of yourself, and a part of you forgot he was even in the room. The conversation organically drifted over to out of time, and it got disturbing.
So, out of time?
He laughed. I'll call it a scaffed. The big man was standing, but he didn't appear to be uncomfortable. For him, sitting in an ill-fitting chair was more awkward because of his tech.
I'm thoroughly surprised to see you amongst the land of the living.
He looked to me and half smiled, as if slightly, I'd have to say, embarrassed at the mention. Time nodded his head, as if he didn't want to add fuel to the flames of this conversation, but Static had just enough fire in the tank, all without his help.
Well, try and try again, right?
Said Static. An image of a cartoon character that looked like an old man, a cartoon way before my time, appeared that I couldn't place. What's that cartoon that popped up on your screen? I asked like an uncool rube.
That is a cartoon called Mr. Magoo. It came out in the 19s at some point. Anyways, he was this little old man that bumbled through life getting into adventures that he didn't know he was on. Even if he was just going to the store, he was so clumsy and absent-minded that he'd either cause or avoid chaos, and he'd never know. A chain reaction of glorious destruction, but he didn't even know it. He always got out of it unscathed, never knowing why and never realizing just how close he came to getting flatlined.
A huge ASCII semicolon parenthesis smiley face appeared on his monitor. He didn't seem that way to me, I said nervously before I could stop myself.
Oh, I wasn't thinking of him,
said Static, who didn't seem as if he was going to elaborate any further. I looked over to Out of Time and started piecing through what Static had said with the little I knew of him. Out of time, out of time, out of time. I had realized something.
You never wanted to come back,
I said to Time. You were going to keep going until your time ran out. The chromed up man looked away and down to the soccer game below.
Yeah? So? What if I was, huh?
You don't know me? I don't know you, huh? I'm just another cyber psycho in a heap of bodies.
Maybe you were yesterday, but now I owe you one, so you can't die until I get you back.
He smiled and laughed heartily. We good, huh? As I was about to delve deeper into his deal, he put up a gauntleted finger without turning his gaze from the soccer game below.
No.
he said, knowing what I was going to ask, so I didn't.
It didn't take long before the Netrunner had something we could use. Static was the perfect host. He somehow managed to juggle conversations with us while at the same time micromanaging his entertainment empire. People fluttered in and out of his orbit constantly, at times colliding with one another, vying for his attention, attempting to pull him away from me or time or whoever else happened to be attempting to divide him at the time. One of the Netrunners said to Static that he had constructed a framework so that if we chose to enter a digital terrain, we, as laymen, would be able to interpret it. As I understand it, when Netrunners go into cyberspace, they only see symbols and glyphs that computers generate. And whenever they do see things that make theoretical sense to our brains, they either make it to break up the monotony or it was constructed for whoever created the virtual space in question. As the Netrunner told us that the AI could talk more or less, and a fraction of his consciousness was still in Elias's brain, so he cribbed off of the residual. You know what? I couldn't make heads or tails of the shit he was saying. From what I could understand, Static and the Runner were going into Elias's corrupted brain to talk to an AI. Or technically, we were, because Static invited me to join, seeing it was my story more than it was his. We stepped into digital space, and it was, at first, a mass of colors and symbols, virtual noise that was more confusing than anything I had ever seen in my life. I saw Static amongst the shifting, floating digital glyphs. The Netrunner spoke in an omnipresent voice. He didn't need a physical body to make sense of the confusion. Me and Static were going to make contact, so he didn't make a body for himself. The formless terrain began twisting itself into something that made sense, and we were slowly walking through the city, though the sky and the distance flickered with transparent glyphs, as if it were wasted uses of digital memory that didn't need to be addressed, therefore didn't need to be rendered. As we walked, the city formed around us, taking us to a grocery store in Adam's estate. I wasn't exactly certain of the actual area, but a part of me seemed to feel that this was a recreation of a real place. I saw Elias and her gang walking through the fucked up, bombed out grocery store, warming themselves by the fire.
Don't worry about them. They're echoes, memories that can only cycle old information,
said the distant, godlike voice of the Netrunner. Static watched Elias as she was talking to her gang. Most of what she said was easily understood, but some words were cut off or garbled, as if her memories were incomplete. The glyphs formed in the hideout like a swarm coalescing to find form. It was something in the form of a person, but not quite. It was like if letters in alphabet cereal were forming into something real. "Are you the AI?" Static said confidently, as if he had no time to be bothered with mystery. He needed to get to the point. The glyphs looked at us as if inspecting us.
"Yes, I suppose I am AI,"
it said in a voice that came from all around it, but originated from anywhere. "What's your objective?"
"Observe and remove all bad threats to the Steel Yard's interests,"
it said in a warbly English. Elias and her friends' images began recycling and skipping forward and back in time. "So you hacked into her tech and made her kill herself?" I asked.
"Yes,"
it stated simply. "Is that your directive? To kill?" asked Static. The swirling transparent symbol stood there as if unsure of how to proceed with that question.
"I am to observe and remove all bad threats to the Steel Yard's interests,"
it restated as if that was answer enough. "What year were you instated?" I asked. The AI didn't hesitate when it said,
2067.
"This thing is ancient as far as AIs go," I said to Static. He nodded and agreed. "When was your last order?" Static questioned.
2069,
it said in a voice that skipped and warbled. It's corrupted, but even still, this makes the Steelyard liable for all those deaths. They wanted to capture the AI, which is the only reason Elias is still alive, Static said to me confidently.
Liability to the Steelyard is unacceptable,
the AI said as it rushed forward with murderous intent. I flinched, but Static didn't move. It moved with the intensity of a vengeful ghost. As the thing thought it were about to grab one of us, the Netrunner dropped from the sky and landed onto one knee directly in front of us. He slammed so hard and fast, it made a crater and explosion of dust. In split seconds, the once pudgy Netrunner, who now had a glistening six-pack, grabbed what passed for the AI's hand and punched it in its intangible face. "Don't kill it," Static said calmly. The thing reached at the yoked virtual hacker, and he stepped to the side when it threw its limbs at it every single time. The battle itself was hard to follow because of the speed they were moving and the fact everything was so high concept. The Netrunner kicked the AI off of him, and it flew into the wall of the grocery store. He beckoned the AI forward with a bring it on wave of his hand. "Stop showing off, Benny," said Static. The Netrunner sighed, as if he had finally got to the good part and was told to skip it because it was unnecessary. The Netrunner ran over to the AI and increased his size until he brushed the ceiling of the grocery store. He grabbed the intangible form of the AI, picking him up like a child collecting fireflies, then putting him in a jar. He and the jar shrank in size, and shortly after he did, he unceremoniously handed the jar to Static. "Well, problem solved for the most part. Here you go," Static said while handing me the jar. "I mean, I kick corporals in the balls quite frequently. This is your first time, so I'll let you have it on the house." I took the jar with trepidation. "So, what, it's just in here?" Static looked to his guy. "Oh, I changed his name to Benny."
Yeah, he's in there. If you want to let him out, do it in digital space that isn't linked to the net in any way, or you may just lose him."
"So there you go," Static said with a bow. His hands pushed up, and he began yanking wires that were only visible in the real world. Then he disappeared from the construct. I took the cue and removed my headset and made that jarring transition back to reality. Static was on his throne couch, looking at a data pad. Where his actual eyes were, I couldn't guess. I looked around and didn't see time. "Where's out of time?" I asked Static. "How the fuck would I know? I was plugged in the same as you," Static said nonchalantly. It seemed very much like he was done with me, and he went back to his work, then inexplicably turned back to me and said, "Did you say goodbye to him at least?" "No. Was he actually going to kill himself?" I said, realizing that maybe Static wasn't being hyperbolic when he mentioned it earlier. "Yeah, most likely. Good dude. Sad to see him go," Static said in a tone that insinuated that he had lost so many people in his life he couldn't fall apart after everyone. "Where is he going?" I said with urgency. "Probably the nearest Steelyard site, though he may have to rearm before he hits it." "What's his end goal?" Static chuckled. "People like him don't really have goals. They're like fireworks. They think they're artillery. They put on a show, they dazzle, then they fizzle out. You just keep doing what you're doing, darling, and you may live long enough to make a difference. More or less." Okay, can I borrow a car? I have to find him. I can't. Can't what? Let him die? There isn't anything you can say or do that's gonna bring him back from the ledge. Unless you think you can bring his family back. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I have to try. I hate to ask for another favor, but I have to ask it. Could you get me a car? Static's scream turned into a heartwarming scene of a mother giving a son a hug. "You're adorable! I'll do you one better. I'll get you a bird's eye view." Static has this tricked out hovercar limo situation that we rode in. He was in contact with his Netrunners, and they extrapolated Time's most probable course by analyzing where the nearest Steelyard site was. In all, Static stayed out of it, letting me spearhead this little expedition. It was as if he just wanted to see what ultimately would happen. Most of the journey, he was either on the phone or checking his media. I think he even did a live stream, though he made certain not to put me in it. We saw Time's tank, the homestead, moving towards the Steelyard's corporate headquarters in North Arvindale. Arvindale being the foremost hub of construction and vertical expansion. Everyone was building on top of themselves like it was a big game of Jenga. He had just gotten off the 1001 and had a 6-block straight shot. Static pulled the limo directly down in traffic, which was illegal as fuck and dangerous. Seeing that Homestead could have just exploded us and not broken a sweat. Homestead came to a screeching halt right up on Nemo Street. As I motioned to get out of the transport, Static didn't follow. "You're a virgin. I think you should get your cherry popped. I'll be over there for a bit," he said. Time stepped out of his tank, 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
"The fuck you doing, you crazy chum?"
he said. "Is it true? You're gonna off yourself?"
"So what if it is?"
he shot back. "I don't want you to die."
"Look, Ravvy, a man has a right to die however he chooses. This is my time. There is my place."
"But why?" I sighed.
"You're a tourist. You ain't no cyberpunk. You don't know nothing about this life, yeah? You don't know what it does. When it's your time, it's your time, huh?"
"Maybe I can help. I don't know." Somehow, Out of Time laughed. He laughed so hard that he was nearly out of breath when he stopped, because he knew that was his last laugh.
"Now you don't owe me shit, huh? I get to go out with a smile."
"But you don't need to go out at all."
"Look, you're a baby punk. You're still a hero. You don't understand that. No, I'm not going to be the one to crush your dreams. I'll let life do that for you. I will say though, if you ever get to where I am, help out a noob like you. Keep it going. But hey, maybe, just maybe, you'll be the one to break the chain, okay?
I smiled and teared up as he got back into his car and drove off to die in a blaze of glory. I watched him drive away in slow motion. I wish I could have met him early in life. Maybe together we could have unlocked the combination of unlikely events that would have seen the Steelyard and all the corpo monarchies tumble. But time was not on our side. Static drove us high over the Steelyard's corporate headquarters, and we watched Time's final stand. And it was as glorious as it was futile. He reaped souls in a desperate dance of death, but like all dances, they came to an end. It was an AI marigold that struck the kill blow. A luxury car/battle mech designed to protect the driver by way of extreme offense. To say he did nothing was a bit of an understatement because he left death and destruction in his wake. But to say it was lasting damage would have been an overstatement. Time and Static were excellent teachers, most likely the best I could have hoped to get. Was I destined to become so disillusioned with the concept of making a difference, I'd rather go out in a blaze than fade away into obscurity? Or would I become a callous media mogul that monetized the truth, only just barely a step above a corpo myself? As I type this, looking at this caged AI, I have to seriously wonder.
Professor K came on the beat.